Okay, hi guys. This is the next set of notes. This is 10-3. We've done 10-1 and 10-2, having to do with some basics of ecology. Now we're going to take a look at biogeochemical cycles. The word bio, of course, has to do with the living portions. The geo has to do with the geological portions, like the rocks and the water and the earth. And the chemical has to do with the chemical portions, like phosphorus and carbon and things like that. So we're only going to do, for this set of notes, there's 4 different types of cycles. We're going to do 2 of them for this set and then 2 for the next set. Alright, here we go. So what is a biogeochemical cycle? Well, it connects the biological, the geological, and the chemical aspects of the biosphere. So it takes into account how matter can be recycled within ecosystems and in between ecosystems. So how the oxygen produced by these trees here can travel all the way over to the animals over there, and how their poo and stuff and runoff can come all the way back down here and affect this down there. So it has to take a look at all those aspects. So we're going to start with the water cycle. The water cycle is probably the one you're most familiar with, because I think you learned that in 3rd grade or something like that. So the water cycle is also referred to as the hydrologic, water. So hydrologic cycle, same thing. Couple of things that go on in the water cycle, as you can see from the picture behind here, is first of all, we have a large body of water, such as an ocean, a pond, a stream, something like that. And the first thing that's going to happen is evaporation. Evaporation is when heat, usually heat from the sun, causes the water molecules on the surface of the large body of water to evaporate and turn from a liquid into a gas. And when it goes into a gas, it goes up into the sky because it is lighter or less dense than the air around it, and so it can actually float up into the sky. And that causes, well, that can form clouds, that can form mist in the air, fog, all sorts of different things. But if the droplets are small enough, you won't even notice them. So it's not until they clump together and make bigger droplets do we actually start to see them. The next thing that's going to happen is transpiration. Trans means across, and then spiration, so has to do with the water moving across a plant. And what I mean by across is through it. So transpiration is water that gets sucked up by plant roots, and then it actually comes out of the little holes underneath the leaves called stomata. I have children running around everywhere trying not to get my attention. It's not working. And so what happens is when the water gets sucked up by the roots, it actually comes out through the open leaves. And leaves usually are pretty good at trying to prevent water loss, but there's a certain amount of water that comes out. It's kind of like when we breathe out, there's a certain amount of vapor that comes out of us. We see that on cold days when we can see our breath. Plants do the same thing. So both evaporation and transpiration are 2 ways that water can actually get from the ground up into the sky. Once the water's up in the sky, we have condensation. Condensation is when the gas water turns into liquid water, usually in the form of a cloud. When the cloud doesn't contain a lot of water, well, then the cloud is big, white, and fluffy. And as we know, when the cloud starts to get full of water, it turns darker. The bottom of it kind of soaked, it looks soaked. And then when the water droplets get too heavy for that cloud, we get precipitation, which is the falling of the rain down to the earth. So we should call it liquid water falling back down to the earth, but it can take any form. It could be sleet, hail, snow, anything like that. But we usually tend to think of precipitation as being rain. Okay, and then once it's down here, once it's back on the ground or back in the ocean, it's ready to go for evaporation again. If it is in, say, a mountain or something like that, then we get something called runoff. Runoff is the water that doesn't get absorbed by the ground, because either the ground isn't able to absorb it, or the ground gets so wet so quickly that it's overwhelmed by the water, and the water just runs right off. And so what we get is water flow down the mountains, down the hills, into maybe a lake or a stream, and then eventually back down to the ocean. So water that's not absorbed by the ground runs off into creeks, rivers, and lakes, and then it's just going to be evaporated again. Now, most of the water that we find on Earth is stored in the ocean. As you know, 70-75% of the Earth's surface is covered by ocean. But that's all salty water, which we cannot drink and do anything with. So we rely on the freshwater sources such as glaciers, lakes, groundwater. There's big pockets of water underneath the earth, and rivers. Those are our freshwater places that we can get drinkable water from. So glacier water, I think there's some, I don't know, whatever the most expensive bottled water out there is, comes straight from glaciers. Okay, so water cycle, not too hard. Carbon cycle. Carbon, as we know, is the most important element for living things. It makes up every molecule that makes us up. So we kind of need carbon in order to survive. So carbon cycle includes a couple different things. One, photosynthesis. We know that plants take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and turn it into glucose, which is just another molecule with carbon at its center, C6H12O6. Then we have respiration, which is just us taking in that sugar and turning it back into carbon dioxide to go back out into the atmosphere. So as you can see from, say, this picture right here, you got the fish who is releasing CO2. It goes out into the atmosphere and builds up in here. And then the plants take in the CO2 and turn it back into oxygen for other animals to use. Now, we don't really think about it, but carbon gets released into the atmosphere by many ways besides just heterotrophs breathing it out. One is decomposition. When animals die, they are full of carbon. Their whole body is based off of carbon. And so when the animals die, decomposers like bacteria and fungi take over and start to break them down into their individual components, one of those being carbon. And so when the animal dies, as we can see right here, some of the carbon will actually go back up into the atmosphere for plants to use. Some of it will just stay in little pockets in the ground and turn into fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are what we use when we fuel up our cars. The only problem, there's only so many dead animals in the ground, and so eventually we will run out of these fossil fuels, which is why we're all big on hybrid cars and things like that right now. Now, the carbon, as you can see, doesn't only cycle between plants and animals, but it goes up into the atmosphere. Modernization, or the Industrial Revolution, is a huge contributor to carbon into the atmosphere. The ocean is actually a nice big storage of carbon. We don't really think about it, but a lot of carbon can go into the ocean and be stored in the form of dissolved carbon dioxide. It could also go into animals, like a clam will use the carbon from the water to make calcium carbonate, which is the main component of his shell. So what makes seashells hard. So there's a huge, and all the coral reefs, all the coral reefs are just big old deposits of carbon as well. So as we can see, lots and lots of carbon out there. Other sources, coal, petroleum, oil, and fossil fuels, they help to store the carbon underground, which is what, when you see those big pumps in the hills that just kind of go back and forth, they're sucking it out of the ground. The ocean is a big old store for carbon dioxide, like I mentioned, with the seashells and the coral reefs, and just dissolved in the water itself, because all those animals are breathing out, and the carbon dioxide stays in the water. Plants, like algae, will take in the CO2 and make oxygen for the fish and other animals to breathe. We also have, we don't think of this one as a big source of carbon, but erosion and volcanic activity. Actually, a lot of the carbon up in the atmosphere is from volcanoes exploding and releasing, or just venting, just poofing air out. Anywhere where mass erosion occurs, like floodings and things like that, where it wipes off that top layer of dirt, carbon just kind of poofs right up into the atmosphere. Also, and here's all the ones that we're responsible for: mining, burning fossil fuels, cutting down forests, things like that. That releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then, of course, combustion. Major fires that we have, especially here in Southern California, we get a lot of fires here, releases a lot of carbon that was stored in the plants out into the atmosphere. So it looks more like we put more CO2 out than we actually take CO2 in. And that's kind of a big problem. That's what we're trying to fix right now. So as you guys know, carbon dioxide, when it mixes with other gases in the atmosphere, create the greenhouse effect, which is good because that's what keeps our Earth in livable temperatures. But it's bad when it doesn't let our Earth cool off, and then we start getting glacier melting and all those other problems. So carbon is a good thing, but too much of it in the atmosphere is a bad thing. Okay, so up next is going to be the nitrogen cycle, but we'll save that for another set of notes another day. See you later. Bye-bye. Have a good day.